I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video will be on self-honesty / self-deception, and the reason I want to talk about this is because quite frequently as of late, whether it's online or within personal dialogues, I've been talking quite a bit about secular morality and the basis for secular morality, and a concept as somebody who's interested in morality and ethics that sits at the foundation of, I guess, the modus operandi of any, should be a part of the modus operandi of any person in the world, is being honest with oneself, or self-honesty. And oftentimes people are curious to know what I mean about being honest with oneself, and it honestly stems all the way back to when I was, I think, 9 years old, in an argument with my sister. And people who are volatile and temperamental have a funny disposition to use withdrawal, or withdrawing themselves from a situation to display their anger or disappointment or a sadness with the situation. And my sister did that whenever she was angry, and she would say nothing was bothering her or whatever, and be unwilling to cough up any information to try and come up with a resolution or anything like that. Like, she would basically pout. And so one time I called her out on her pouting, and she said she wasn't pouting, or she was just saying there was nothing wrong. And so, me being the cheeky little brother I told her that, look, you can lie to other people, but don't lie to yourself. Like, don't lie to yourself, basically. And what I meant by that is that so long as you know you don't believe that BS, then it's fine. But if you actually believe that what you're saying is true, you are on a crash course for disaster. I mean, I think, and I believe that fundamentally, and there's a reason for it, because one, human beings as we are, or as we are extant in this world, we're embedded in complex systems, non-linear dynamic systems that make it such that any one action always leads to a multitude of consequences that stretch beyond the horizons of any person's immediate perception, to such a degree that being able to predict with any level of certainty what's going to be a result of what you do is only possible through the observation of other people, stories, moral structures and systems, things that are not extant in you when you're born, for the most part, or also through experience. It's the case that because the world is a self-organizing system, basically, that the butterfly effect is overly used in a mystic sense, but is a true description of what it means to exist in the world. And it's why there is always a consequence for your actions beyond the I suppose not beyond the physics, but at a lower tier than the physical landscape, even in the social, emotional landscape for a human being, merely because we're biological, physiological, social things. We live in a network, we live in chains and networks of communities and stability structures, such that whenever we decide to do any one thing, it sends a chain work of actions throughout this whole highly reactive landscape. I mean, it's the case that reality is just a vacuum of potential. I mean, you can look at it like that, that forms spontaneously emerge and dissipate or are formed over time by the actions and the decisions of other people. And it's the case that the world we're living in is just a consequence of the decisions that human beings have made over their evolutionary history. And it's the case that you're another actor in that drama and in that narrative. That's why whatever you do and whatever you believe matters, because you're not something that goes into the world and acts independent of what they believe is true about the world or what they believe is true. So your beliefs definitely influence your actions. More so, it's the case that whenever, because we're pragmatic for the most part, it's the case that we should try to come up with the most accurate descriptions of the world and ourselves that we possibly could come up with, because we're going to act on the world because it is our primary disposition to act on the world and to do things in the world and with one another. It's the fact that human beings, us being social things, we want to act on and influence one another, and we want to see our goals and our ends met in the environment because we're emotional, motivational creatures. And so it's the case that it's a rather sticky situation. You will act, you will do, you will try to influence other people, you will try to make things happen, you will be a certain sort of agency, and because you're this agent in the world, you have the potential to affect reality either in socially sustainable or acrimonious ways, or in rather pernicious and pervasive and socially chaotic and destructive ways. And it's not the case that it's just this black and white juxtaposition between social stability and I suppose in chaos, because the landscape of reality is fundamentally chaotic, at least I believe, and any order that's in that landscape has been imposed by human beings. It's not honestly there for the most part. And it's the case, at least when we're talking about the world that we live in terms of cities, societies, and communities and culture. I mean, that's all created. It's not without cause and recourse from biological and natural sources, but it is the case that it's all an abstraction, or it's all a idea. It's not like, I mean, I know buildings are concrete, but it's the case that somebody had the idea to make buildings and structures and things, and that's why we have them. And that's the only reason why we have them. It's not because they grow out of the ground. It's because human beings impose order to a chaotic world for the most part. And it's the case that we impose chaos to our own world, or we impose structure to it. Sometimes we need to impose chaos, but it has to be for socially sustainable reasons. And when I talk about social sustainability, I mean in terms of equilibrated states. I don't believe in utopias, and I don't think that not getting in trouble and being nice or following rules is moral at all. I don't think that at all. But I think very really that the only way we can honestly exist in this world in such a way that other people, that we find our own existences meaningful, and other people find their existences meaningful, the only way we can do that is if we try to act out the best social game we can possibly act out. We have to come up with the best dramatization and narrative for our existence in such a way that every person knows whether or not they want to participate, and they can make the decision that is best amenable to their inclinations and dispositions in terms of whether or not they want to partake in the fraternity and the festivities, or if they want to descend against them and be on the outskirts. And I mean, in whatever way an individual decides to do either of those things for themselves has each of its own consequence. And it's the case that our societies or our beliefs should be set up in such a way that this decision is as easy as possible. And it should be the case that our decisions and our actions should make it such that we encourage people to be cooperative and negotiating in nature. We don't really want things to spill over into conflict and violence. I mean, but it's not the case that violence and conflict are the devils. It's the case that there's always consequence. I mean, there just is always consequence. The reason you can't have murder be a relativistically based law or concept is because people are vengeful. I mean, it's the case that if you decide that you want to go around killing people, there are going to be a lot of other people that decide that they want to kill you. And it's going to be the case that if we have it such that people are killing, I mean, you know, people are also embedded in community, and there's a reason why people are vengeful. One, people don't like to feel like you take their possessions, and people don't like for you to infringe on their ability to survive. So when you decide you want to kill people, I mean, from the I guess the emotional landscape, families aren't gonna like that, like, at all. And you can best believe that families are going to, well, hell, that's how a lot of wars have started between families, because somebody from one family killed an individual from another family, and those families are now going to get involved in the business of trying to kill one another and recruiting other families to do so, and you get warfare. Or it's the case that you kill somebody who's important to a community, to a system and its functioning. People aren't going to be pleased with that, because it's really difficult to replace somebody who's competent at something. And, like, people aren't going to be okay with that. And it's also the case that and it's also the case, because people are vengeful, that they're not fair. And it tends to be the case that people tend to feel like this: if you harm me, I am going to harm you twice in magnitude and degree of which you've harmed me, so that you never do it again. That's basically how people are. And it makes it such that everybody is just going to up the ante when it comes to murder, always. And people are also competitive, and they're social. And so if we make murder a valuable action, Jesus, man, there won't be many people in the world. And you can say, well, why the hell is human life intrinsically valuable? It's the case that objectively it's not, but no organism likes death. I mean, most organisms don't want to die. And collectively, we're not going to like the idea of our extinction. Like, whether or not you think it's justified for people to be around on the planet, I mean, human beings are no less justified in existing on the planet than chimpanzees are, or that sea mollusks or lizards are. I mean, if you have an issue with human beings, you should have an issue with all life, because, I mean, human beings are just one representation of the whole biological stratum. I mean, and it's the case that we don't want to die, and there is no justification, and there is no lack of justification either. It's honestly a moot point, rather a fact of reality that life exists, and it feels justified in its instantiation and wants to act out that narrative. It's the fact that most human beings feel this way, and most people act this way. It's why people are not particularly keen on the idea of death. And so if these factors are the case, it's nonsensical, or it's non-sustainable to have a murderous society. They don't exist for a very long time. And so you can't make killing a value. It doesn't mean you can't make war a value, because you obviously need to protect yourself. And it's also the case that it doesn't mean that violence can't be something that's valued, because you honestly need a means of self-defense. And if you're not, and it's not like people are nice. I mean, and it's not like people aren't willing to be violent with you. So you need to value violence, and you need to value war, because it's not like people are just simply benevolent. We're not inhabiting a world where men and women act as angels, or any cisgender, binary, whatever. Hell, human beings are not angels. Like, that's the first damn thing you can know about a human being, and be certain of it. But it's not the case that murder or killing a value is a good idea. And that's what I mean about something being socially equilibrated. And it's the case that you should try and make it such that your actions are more equilibrated than not, because you don't live in a world where people are not quick to judge you, where people are not quick to want to act on you and influence you based on the ways that you act on them and influence them. And it's also the case that you don't want to encourage people to behave malevolently. And your very actions can be the things that decide whether or not people want to behave as devils or saints when interacting with you. Even if it just is limited to their interactions with you. You should try to the best of your degree to make it such, if you're having a conversation with a homicidal maniac, you should try and make sure that he at least likes you, or can tolerate you at the very least. And it's the case that you can, in terms of your disposition as a human being, you can collect a series of actions and behaviors that would make it more likely for a person to be willing to tolerate you or not, or find you useful, or value you from an emotional and social standpoint. And you should, given how you naturally or are innately are, try to figure out how to act out that narrative in the best way that you possibly can. It doesn't mean that the narrative for you is going to be the same as another person, because there are temperamental and socioeconomic and biological variances across the board when it comes to people. But it's the case that the idea of being an equilibrated person or a good person is a universal thing that all people should try to act out, because it makes it such that the world does not want to destroy itself. I mean, just point blank. And why should it be your job to make it such that the world doesn't want to destroy itself? Is because, I mean, it makes your life better. I mean, you feel better when people like you. That's because you're social, and you would like it for people to want to have you stick around. I mean, and people really only want you to stick around if they value you and if they find you useful. Utility value is not the same as emotional and social value. That's why we can, absolutely hate somebody and think that they're a jerk, but we'll let them be our boss because they get things done, and they make it such that we receive a profit, and we like that because of the society we're embedded in. The point is, I mean, it's the case that you should make yourself useful, and you should make yourself socially and emotionally valuable to other people. And that doesn't mean that you're a yes man or you're nice or anything like that. But it's the case that you as a human being have the capacity to be either antisocial or pro-social in your actions. And it's the case that not every antisocial behavior is degradatory or detrimental, and not every pro-social behavior is benefactory in its indulgence. I mean, that ain't the case at all. You can be too nice. You really can be too nice. And it's the case that there are a collection or a suite of things, and depending on who you are, those things are going to differ from person to person. But you have to be judicious in your understanding and selection of what those things are and how to act them out. And you can't really do that if you're not honest with yourself. You can't do that. I mean, you're the easiest person to lie to. I mean, for you to lie to. You very much so are. Because your brain conspires against you. Your brain doesn't necessarily want you to be honest with yourself. I mean, it really doesn't. It's not that it doesn't want you to be. It doesn't care if you're honest with yourself or if you're not honest with yourself. And that's the best way to describe it, because the brain is just a motivational system. It really is. I mean, that's like, I can't emphasize that more. It, like, not to regress people down to a reductionistic model that is inaccurate in its description. But I mean, like, if you want to boil things down to like the fundamental disposition of the thing, the brain is absolutely freaking motivational, and it does not. It's not that it cares to be malevolent. It's just the case that it does not care to be a certain way that's not in line, in accordance with its values and its dispositions towards reality or towards achieving the goals and the ends that it selects for itself. And it's not like it's intentionally, it's not like any of these things are personal. They're not personal. But it's not like your brain is conspiring against you to make it such that you can't be honest with yourself. It's just that it's not necessarily concerned with being honest. It's not necessarily concerned with being honest. And every person knows this. It's why you can rationalize things and deceive yourself. And but that should tell you something about the way that you should conduct yourself in the world. You have to pay attention. You really have to pay attention to what you say and what you do, and try and be as forthright as you possibly can, because it's the only thing, it's the only hope to your salvation. I mean, every person wants to be a social agent. Whether they know that they do or they don't know that they do, they absolutely do. Because that's all your biology is there for. And it's also the case that you would like to be the social agent that people would want to deify. Like, no kidding. Like, I mean, I could use less verbose language, but I mean, like, that's what it looks like from a descriptive standpoint. I mean, every person wants to be that. That's why people get up in arms when people come up with their descriptions of alpha males. It's because they're like, well, no, that's horseshit. And that's why people are really, really quick to protect legends and geniuses and Christophanies, basically, or whatever you want to consider the image of Christ is. And it's the case that, and that's why people say you're supposed to act out and imitate that thing, because you want to. Whether you know you do or you don't, you want to. That's the only reason you have the capacity for admiration in the first place. It's the only reason why you tend to like somebody you're not related to or you don't know, either for admirational reasons or sexual interest. Like, if I'm just being point blank honest about it, like, and it's not like you consciously know these things. It's not like you consciously know these things, and it's not like you think them out. I mean, like, oftentimes you do think them out, but most times you're not aware of them, and you're acting in such a manner to make yourself the thing that's at the top of a dominance hierarchy. Well, the point is, you want to act that way to make it such that you're the thing that could exist at the top of the dominance hierarchy. Now, there's reasons why you would be able to make that ascent, or why you wouldn't be able to make that ascent, that extend beyond your natural biological disposition, and that has to do with the distribution of traits and societal values and a whole host of other complicated factors. But it's the case that you want to do it. Whether or not you know you want to do it is irrelevant. The case is, it's observable, like freaking absurdly observable, that that's what you want to do. Now, it's the case that there are good ways about going about doing that, and there are some bad ways about going about doing that. And it's the case that, and yeah, I mean good and bad, in the sense that, you know, nothing's inherently moral, but it's also the case that there's not 101 ways to play a game and win it. There really isn't. I mean, there's only a few ways you can play, because there are constraints. There are real constraints. I mean, because of it, because a human being is what it is, and because societies tend to construct themselves in the way that they do. I mean, like, for everything that people want to say about cultures and what people want to say about societies in terms of their differences, I mean, they're really superficial. For the most part, human beings, in the ways that they decide to construct their tribes and systems and ways of being with one another, I mean, it's not different. It does not differ all that much from people group to people group, or from thing to thing to thing. And the outliers are indeed the outliers. They're just the anomalies. Like, they're rather the exception than the norm. And that's one thing that pisses me off, like, whenever I listen to feminists talk about the ways that societies construct themselves, because it's the case that, yeah, you have societies that are matriarchal, and it's the case that they're the exception. Like, they're the exception for a multitude of reasons. And it's not to say, whatever, I'm gonna say it, I don't fucking, whatever, I don't care about politics. The point is, like, I don't, like, whatever, I don't care about that stuff. The point I'm trying to make is just that it's the narrative that seems to re-represent itself and recapitulate itself from, like, the beginning to whatever the end of our existence is that human beings organize themselves in particular ways because of the creatures that they are. And it's not going to be the case that we're going to tolerate 101 representations of what it means to exist. We really aren't, because we're judgmental. We're very much so judgmental, because, funnily enough, we want to place things on top of dominance hierarchies and follow them. I mean, like, that's a survival strategy. That's really a survival strategy, because we don't all have to be exceptional if we have an exceptional human being that we can just place on the top of a dominance hierarchy, and they take care of all the nasty, hard things that we don't want to deal with and we don't want to take care of. Like, we prefer, because we're relatively lazy. Like, I mean, like, that's the case. I mean, chimpanzees are like that. Like, they don't have alpha males because they like oppression. They have alpha males because they like to survive, and it benefits them in their survival strategies in terms of the overall game they're playing. And it's the same thing with human beings, because we're primates, so, like, hell, we inherited that game. And it's the case that, you know, that's why people also seem like lemons, or lemmings, just things that will run off a fucking cliff if nobody tells them that the cliff's there, like, because, you know, we're waiting, like, and that's why there's all these goddamn messianic stories, because we are basically waiting. We're always waiting, and we're always looking and judging. Like, that's what we're always doing. We're looking and judging, saying, are you the guy? No, you're not the guy. Are you the gal? No, you're not the gal. Like, whatever, I'm on to the next person. I mean, like, that's crazy. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's really crazy. But that's what human beings are up to, you know? It's, like, really fucking bizarre. But that's what they're up to. And it's not because of any divine narrative. It's just because we're overgrown bonobos. Like, well, not bonobos, because bonobos would be egalitarian. We're overgrown chimpanzees, like, basically. And it's the case that, yeah, and so you want in on this, and you also want it to be the case, and you want in on this factor, and because everybody, you know, because nature is conservative, so it's going to make it such that everybody's looking for one, and everybody would want to be one, simultaneously. It's like, you know, I don't know why, but that's like the way it does, that's the way it puts it together. And it's the case that you're intimately aware of it, like, whether you know you are or not. Like, that's what every goddamn kindergartner is doing in a classroom when they're looking around and sizing one another up. I mean, like, they're sizing one another up, like, for some very crude reasons in terms of the dynamics that they want to establish. I mean, Lord of the Flies isn't a mythology, like, it really isn't. But it's the case that the reason that could even emerge on the landscape of the paradigm of our existence is because we're doing this sorting house game, or we're doing this thing of trying to figure out, you know, what should be on top, who should be on top. And when we say a what, we mean a who, because we're going to find a who first, and then we're going to turn that who into a what, i.e. Christianity, or i.e. any damn religious system. Like, I'm not kidding. And it's the case that we're trying to answer that question. And it's the case that if you want to play out that game, and it's also the case that the reason we're trying to answer that question, because it's the case that that game is the only game we can play in such a degree that not only can the Ubermensch exist, but the collective and the populace can exist as well and benefit from them. I mean, honestly, benefit from them. You know, we don't have Supermen and we don't have geniuses and we don't have alpha males for them to just run buckshot across the landscape of existence. But we also don't have societies and communities and the collective here to repress their expression and their existence. But it's the case that because everybody wants to be the thing, and because everybody is simultaneously looking for the thing, we find it that we have a lot of issues in actually getting it right, because we're dumb. Like, we're very, very dumb. Like, human beings are dumb. We're just ignorant and stupid in a lot of ways, but it's okay. We slowly make it better, and it's the case that we ought to try to make it better because we have nothing else to do. Like, we really have no other way to make our existence meaningful, or to feel like it's meaningful, because about the only way you're going to feel like your existence matters is if other people want you to stick around, if your communities are stable, they treat you well, other people treat you well, and you have something that you do that you can take pride in. That's about it. I mean, like, that's about it. And that's, like, those things are, tied up to the suite of your positive emotions. And I mean, like, your positive emotions are going to be about the only thing that make it such that you want to live, and that you want to make it such that other people can live and be happy. I mean, for the most part, people just really do want to be happy. Like, like, in a crude way, they just want to be happy. You know, take that for what it's worth. But, I mean, you would want, if you could pick, you would rather the world be someplace full of positive meaning than it being one of complete negative meaning. Because if it's a world of negative meaning, you know, this is also a warning to nihilists, because it's oftentimes why like, Disney movies are a great example. So, The Lion King. You know, Scar tries to basically invoke a nihilistic totalitarian dystopia on Pride Rock, right? And what happens to Scar in the end? He gets killed, like, he gets eaten, because if you think that you can harness nature or the power of nature without it having its way with you, you're insane. Like, you're really insane. You're too prideful. You're arrogant. Like, you really are. Because it's the case that you don't know, like, you really don't know all of the ways that we're connected to one another, and you really don't know how people are going to take things, and what a human being honestly is. Like, you don't really know that. And human beings are murderous, and they don't mind killing one another. They really don't. And the degree to which all mayhem and licentiousness and complete anarchy can grip us, like, we have those things in stories for reasons, because they've happened. They very much happened. And if you think that our modern age is the only age in which we have had the capacity to utterly wipe ourselves out, there's a reason why the Bible kept talking about the end times is near, the end times is near, the end times is near. Because societies have basically imploded, and, you know, not once, not twice, but several times throughout all of human history. And it's the case that if we don't want that thing to happen, I mean, we should try to figure out how to play the game the best damn way that we can play it. And to such a degree that positive emotion basically makes it such that we would much rather create and be sacred beasts rather than being destructive and virtually tumultuous and resentful, envious, murderous, and arrogant beasts. Like, that's not a good fit either. But it doesn't mean we can't have pride. You should be prideful. To hell with what the Bible says. Pride and arrogance aren't the same things. Because I think pride is just an appraisal of something. Like, if you're being honest, like, and this is why you have to be honest with yourself. Like, I'm getting to the honesty part. Because, I mean, it's a very tricky goddamn game you're trying to play. Like, it really is. Because there's so many ways you can screw up. And there's so many reasons why you have to get it right. Like, I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, societies are set up in such a way that you can basically run on automatic, and you don't really have to be overly concerned with too many of your actions in terms of the ways that they influence and affect other people. But that's why so many people have midlife crises. That's also why so many people are in debt. It's also why most people aren't highly successful, because it's the case that if you really want to win, you have to pay attention. You have to be vigilant, and you can't run on automated, and you can't let your predilections and natural inclinations and dispositions run you as an individual. That's not okay. And you also can't have it such that you don't give people things that they want. Like, if you don't get people to cooperate with you, and if you don't negotiate with people and curb your motivations, directives, and interest towards the motivations, directives, and interests of other people, you won't win. Like, and I mean, and when I say you won't win, I mean, you won't have it such that the world smiles on you to the degree that you don't have to worry about your survival and whether or not somebody would be willing to select you in terms of sexual selection. Like, none of those things are going to happen if you just run on autopilot. Like, that's really not going to be the case. Like, even with very robust and favorable traits, because, I mean, reality is sufficiently complicated, and there's so many networks that you have to navigate, like so many, like, it's fucking obnoxious, like, but that's what it means to exist, like, and so it's the case that, you know, if you're really going to try to play the game such that you think that you ought to take care of yourself, and you ought to take care of other people. And I don't mean, you know, whatever. Like, I'll get to what I mean by those things in other videos if I ever have the opportunity to. But it's just a case that if those things sound like they make sense to you, then if you want to do that, you have to be definitely honest with yourself, because you're not necessarily interested in those things innately. You have one part of you that's pro-social, and you have another part of you that's not social at all, and it doesn't give two shits about you. I mean, like, it really doesn't. It's the case that your brain is just, more of your brain is unconscious, and then more of your brain is unconscious than there is of your brain that is conscious. And it's the case that you have your conscious wants, desires, and goals, and you even have the way that you put yourself together in terms of your self-image and the thing that you're going to use to direct your efficacy in the world. Well, if you're not trying to get familiar with the shadow person or the shadow man that exists in you, and you're not trying to watch yourself in terms of all the ways that you could possibly be in the world, and are very much so willing to be in the world, like whether or not you want to be honest, like whether or not you want to realize you're very much willing to be in the world, you won't make it. Like, you won't get to the promised land, like, to use a metaphor for a lack of a better way of describing it, because you're going to start off in captivity. I mean, like, you really are going to be a slave to your nature to a very strong extent. I mean, kids are temperamental kids are volatile for a very good reason. I mean, it's because they come that way. They're animals. Like, they're most instinctively instantiated as animals, and are not all that well behaviorally based things. And it's also the case that they're not all that well thinking based things. I mean, and it's the case that, you know, instinctual and imaginative is the way the kids are, and that ain't, like, that's not, you know, you wouldn't want to put a 4-year-old in charge of anything, like, and you wouldn't trust them with your life. Like, you really wouldn't. If you're being honest with your kid, if you're being honest with the way the kids are, because kids aren't innocent. I mean, they're innocent in a certain way, but kids aren't harmless. Like, that's the best way I should put it. Kids aren't harmless. That's not the that ain't the way that they are at all. And it's the case that every person is like that. And about the only thing that changes is that as you grow up, you decide, well, what different behavioral mandates will I subjugate myself to, and what rules do I decide I want to impose on myself such that it'll make it more profitable for me to act and be in the world. Or I'll decide I'm not going to act in the world because it's not going to be to my profit. For whatever, however else you, in whatever ways you're estimating whatever your profit is. I mean, like, Jesus. There's a lot of ways that thing can go. But no matter what you decide, the only way that you're going to get there and the only way that you're going to achieve the thing, which I'm assuming you want a meaningful life, is if you're honest with yourself. Because there's more ways for you to be dishonest with yourself than for you to be honest with yourself. That's why it has to be an exercise and something you strive for, because it ain't automatic. Like, it's not just gonna happen. You're not born with character. You're really not. And you're not born with your own interests in mind. Like, even if you think that you are, you're really not, because you're not smart enough to see all the ways that reality is going to play itself out based on the way that you decide to act or behave or whatever decision you make in an immediate sense. And so you have to listen. Like, you very much so have to listen, pay attention, and be honest. And like the only way you can listen and pay attention is if you're honest. You're definitely honest. I want this, and I am a liability to myself in terms of my ability to acquiesce in acquiring the goddamn thing that I so desire and covet. And the Holy Grail, that thing would be being a thing at the top of the dominance hierarchy. Maybe I can be that thing, maybe I can't be that thing. And honestly, you'll never freaking bloody know. Like, you'll never really know. Like, I mean, you know, and you can't, whatever. Like, the point is, like, it's hard. It's hard for me to articulate it. Because I haven't worked out morality. It's hard. You know, like, most moral systems that have come, that are secular, that have come before me aren't good. Like, they're really not good. So I'm making it up as I go. But it's the case that, would you like some positive meaning in your life? That's the question you basically have to ask yourself. And if the answer is yes, then you have to realize there's more things that would make it such that you would experience a whole hell of a lot of negative meaning in your life than there are things that would make it such that you would experience positive meaning. And the, I guess, shameful and tragic truth is, you are willing to be a conspirator in the narrative of your own tragedy more than you might be willing to realize you're willing to be a conspirator in that tragedy. And you are a liability to your own well-being and self more than you probably are willing to realize you are. And you ought to do something about that, because you will not tolerate life if you don't do something about that. And we would like you to be able to tolerate life and find it meaningful and worthwhile. Because if you don't, the thing that you might become is problematic. And it's the case that when you become problematic, the world tends to become more problematic. And it's the case that other people, because the world becomes more problematic, other people are more likely to become problematic. And we want to mitigate the likelihoods of any of these things propagating, like, if we can. And so that's why we should try and come up with equilibrated states. And that's why you should try to be a good person. But you can't be a good person if you're not honest with yourself. You really can't. Like, don't lie to yourself. It's not a good idea. And it's not like you willingly lie to yourself. You don't always willingly lie to yourself. You don't always willingly do that. But you also have to be honest with it. Be honest in the sense that I'm not a creature that's always willing to be honest with themselves or with other people. Whether they know that they are, or whether I know that I am, or whether I know that I am, or whether I don't know that I am, that's the case. And I should act in accordance with that truth. And so that's what I always mean. That's what I always mean when I say that you have to be honest with yourself. And that's a fundamental principle of my secular moral system. And I will talk more about what I call the secular project in another video. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you found it informative and interesting.